Hello and welcome to Castle of Horror, the show dedicated to horror movies and awesomeness. This week we have a look at the 1997 film Scream 2. This is episode number 403. It's actually the second Scream movie that we've done, and we are going to be covering the entire Scream franchise all the way up to the 2023 title. And so this will be an exciting walk down memory lane. All right, bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have seen it. So, warning, spoilers ahead. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, publisher at Castlebridge Media, home of the Castle of Horror anthology. With me from Austin is Tony Savaggio, lead singer and bassist of the band Deserts of Mars, and lead guitarist of the band Rise from Fire. Say hello, Tony.
Howdy.
Howdy. Also in Austin, Mr. Drew Edwards is the writer-creator of the long-running underground comic Halloween Man, which you can find at Global Comics. He is a Best Writer Ringo nominee, Austin Chronicle Best of Austin Award winner, and a member of the PEN America Fellowship. Say hello, Drew.
Hello, Jason.
Hello. That's it. And finally, also in Denver, color commentary from the one, the only Julia Guzman of Guzman Immigration of Denver. Say hello.
Hello.
Hello, hello. Boy, what a busy we just got back from a Bach concert, and now we are talking about Scream 2. I
So
could not.
classy.
I know, and
You
so I
shame us with your class.
needed to trash it up. Now that we're back, we gotta watch some college students getting sliced to ribbons. All right. Scream 2 is a 1997 American slasher film directed by Wes Craven, written by Kevin Williamson, a sequel to Scream of 1996, like released, literally filmed just a year later. So when you look at these actors, they are literally a physical year older tops. The film was released on December 12th, 1997 by Dimension, the second installment in the Scream series. It takes place 2 years after the first movie, and again follows the character of Sidney Prescott, that's Neve Campbell, and other survivors of the Woodsboro massacre at the fictional Windsor College in Ohio, where they are targeted by a copycat killer using the guise of Ghostface. Like its predecessor, Scream 2 combines the violence of the slasher genre with elements of comedy, satire, and the whodunit mystery. And once again, they spend a lot of time talking about the cliches of film sequels. What an interesting film series to come back to. I am shocked that we haven't come back to it. And Tony, we're going to start with you because I believe that somehow, even though you and I were friends in the late 90s when this movie hit the theaters, I don't think that you actually went to see this. So
No, in fact, no, I haven't at all. In fact, I haven't seen. This is my first time. This is probably there are people who probably get out their torches and pitchfork, but this is my first time going through any of these. I think I've started Scream 1 half a dozen times and never really got into it. So I've watched the first two so far, and I will be the fresh person on this. I guess, Julia, have you seen them all?
Not all, but I've seen. I think I've seen these two.
Yeah, I haven't. I'll be the new person for all of these. I don't. I have a weird it's weird seeing them now because everything that's come after them has this franchise did bring back horror for a lot of people. Was really successful. I mean, we're still making them, so obviously there's something going on. But it never. I guess the appeal to me was I thought some of the really on the nose, you get it right, horror was just from the trailers. It didn't interest me. I still kind of dig Cabin in the Woods, but you don't get Cabin in the Woods, I think, without Scream, right? So I'm coming at this in the same way that people go, oh, well, this movie's my favorite. It's like, well, you don't have that without X, Y, and Z previously, right? So I'm kind of coming into this and just taken objectively, but as a 90s time capsule as well, this is is it exactly horror in the 90s? I think it's great that it brought back horror. And again, people, as fans, people go, horror never left, but it did kind of push it back into mainstream, but kind of like in my opinion, kind of like our discussion of Mystery Science Theater, like it became kind of the cheeky deconstruction part became the focus for a lot of people, as opposed to kind of where it was like the horror parts, in my opinion. And so that's a kind of plus and minus, but it's a solid slasher flick. regardless. So
That's thank you very much. And I actually I can't wait to talk about this because I'm curious. Julia, you're next. Opening thoughts, but do you remember our discussion of Scream 1, or were you? I mean, we went ahead and went back and watched it, but I'm just curious what your thoughts are and whether your opinion of the other one had changed in the intervening years.
I don't remember. No, I remember the movie Scream, the first Scream, but I don't remember the conversation. Of course, I don't remember very many of the conversations that we've had. Honestly, I'm just like, yeah, I'm terrible. No, I don't remember seeing this movie Scream 2 in the theater. I feel like I've seen it because I remember the whole Sarah Michelle Gellar thing. But maybe like Tony, maybe I just watched part of it and then just was like, okay,
Well,
I'm done.
also remember Sarah Michelle Gellar gets killed in a theater in I Know What You Did Last Summer, as well.
Also, yeah, but
So,
no, I
yeah.
definitely remember this, like the answering the phone and all that. So I don't know, but yeah. Anyway, I enjoy these. I know we're going to talk about this as we go through, but I enjoy the very 90s nature of everything in these films. The clothing, the technology, the look of everything. All of it. So that it's fun for me. Because when I was in the 90s, and this is true now as well, but when I was in the 90s, I remember thinking, what's gonna be like? I don't think anything is very like doesn't feel distinctive about this decade. It feels just like this is just normal. I don't see anything looking around.
Right.
And now I'm like, oh, that was all 90s, but I didn't recognize it at the time. It's it's got some really fun stuff about it. I don't know why, I just really loved Jada Pinkett Smith's death scene. I think it's
Oh, really?
fantastic. I just think
Yeah.
it's so over the top and ridiculous and hilarious and wonderful. I don't know. That was my favorite death scene in any of these slasher films that we've seen, I think.
Fantastic.
Yeah, but anyway, there's a lot of fun things to talk about.
Thank you. Drew, favorite death scene, Jada Pinkett Smith, or do you have
I like that the opening sequence in this a lot, which I will get into in a moment. I've often said on social media that this is my favorite Wes Craven movie. That doesn't mean I think it's his best movie or that I think it's the most innovative. This is 100% a comfort food movie for me, which is, I guess, a kind of a weird thing to say about a slasher movie, but
No, I'm down. Yeah.
I get warm fuzzies when I watch this movie, and I'm gonna just to put you in my headspace of where, first of all, the opening sequence takes me, and the place that puts me in, like the nostalgic feelings. I'm gonna picture rural Texas. There is, with a small movie theater, the original Scream comes out a year before. My outcast group of friends who love horror films and Dungeons and Dragons and, punk rock music and everything, like the outcasts of this town go nuts for the first Scream. The second one comes out. We decide we're going to all go together to the National Theater dressed as Ghostface. So we all collectively are in Ghostface costumes, completely ignorant of what the opening sequence is like.
That's
so
wild.
We go and we sit down, and everybody who is, a mostly teen audience who are like, geez, what's the deal with these guys? And the opening sequence starts, and of course everybody around us starts freaking out because they think that we're somehow part of the movie. So it's just a perfect encapsulation of
That's
me
awesome.
and my misfit friends with this movie. And this is like a thank you. It's like a pop culture moment. And it feels
great.
like so solely mine. And because that is one of my most vivid memories of teendom, this movie has always had a very special place in my heart. I think and objectively, I do think it is a lot of fun. Like, I think the Scream series in general is fun, but this one in particular, like it's really, it's Wes Craven and Kevin Williamson really firing on all gears. And there's some, other than the aforementioned opening sequence, there is some really amazing scenes in this movie that I hope we can cover them all. But I like this movie a lot. Like I'm it's my favorite in the series, and it's definitely my favorite Wes Craven movie. And I'll save the rest of my thoughts for later, but I'm excited to talk about this.
Thank you very much. I mean, okay, so Julia and I went back and watched back to back Scream 1 and Scream 2. I have a hard time remembering. I didn't go back and listen to our discussion of Scream 1. I will tell you that I remember that I was being kind of a bitch about it, because I remember that I didn't really respond well to Scream 1 when we discussed it last time. I was like, this is like Golden Books level understanding of horror movies. It's all really lame. I feel really pandered to. It was weird. I don't know. I don't know what was going on. But this time I watched it and I was like, it's fine. This one I like, and this film, Scream 2, I feel really delivers on the premise that Scream 1 was trying to like hit a stride with. I like this movie a lot better. I like the even though it's only a year later. And by the way, isn't that what you would want, right? That you'd kind of hit your stride and kind of figure out what you're doing. And I thought the commentary on what goes on in a horror movie is a little more knowing. There's more meta weirdness in this one. The mystery is fine, but that's not even particularly what it's about. And I thought that some of the performers were just really bringing their game. So as silly as this movie is, the performers are all doing a good job. Nobody plays it like they're in some sort of meta commentary. Everybody plays this like it's really straight. And another thing to think about is that this film, we can talk about it representing Wes Craven later, but for now, I would say this film representing kind of where the Hollywood, movie machine was, is just like a perfect example of its game. It looks gorgeous. The fashions are gorgeous. The music is perfectly timed. The sound is excellent. It feels like, if you hate Hollywood movies, especially in the late 90s, this is just another example of what you wish would go away. But boy, it just uh, I remember, by the way, watching this in the theater and having a really good time. So Julia does not remember watching it, and we watched it together in 1997.
Yeah, but I never remember watching anything with anybody.
Yeah. we saw it in Austin, as a matter of fact. Yeah. Okay, so the first thing that we should talk about really is just setting up the plot, and then I want to get into the question of let's do plot and then cast, and then I do want to talk about the 90s. If we get there a little bit early, then we'll just get there early and we'll skip it as a major topic by itself. But the plot, it is a year after the killing at Woodsboro. A pair of killers who called themselves Ghostface were trying to actually, why were they killing a bunch of people? Like, oh, it was revenge. Yeah, it was a personal story involving revenge, I guess. To be honest with you, it's a little vague to me what Skeet Ulrich
Billy
wanted.
Loomis, Nev Campbell, Sidney Prescott's boyfriend.
Yeah.
His thing was that he was getting revenge because her mom had an affair. Her mom had an affair with his dad, causing his mother to leave, which is
Right.
what is the aspect of this which is important to this film. Billy Loomis, not Billy Loomis, Stu Macher, the other Ghostface killer, he quote was just responding to peer pressure because he's quote unquote far too sensitive.
Yeah, and that was Matthew Lillard, who
is so weird. He's so weird in that movie. I love his performance.
There's nobody as gonzo as Matthew Lillard in this. To an extent, this film has shaved off the rough edges even of Scream 1, and given us, now Sidney is at college. And as much as we talk about how much we hated Embrace of the Vampire, it's very, very similar in terms of, a lot of like big crane shots coming down through the trees, looking at the quad of this college. And it's a very 90s idea of college as kids in 90s fashions and berets kind of move back and forth and stuff. I love the way this thing looks.
Yeah. I had a feeling the college setting of this would win you over.
Oh yeah. Everybody knows that I'm a fetishist for settings of any kind. Like as long as something's clearly set, so I can go, there are markers here of whatever the hell it is. I don't care what it is, whether SeaWorld, a college somewhere, a library somewhere. It doesn't matter as long as the setting has a lot of markers that keep getting hit. It feels like you could load it up as a holodeck, thing. I'm down with that. Yeah, Sydney, in a way. By the way, Scream 6 is essentially a remake of this movie, which is so crazy. but but Sydney has come to college. Everybody that was with her at Woodsboro is essentially here as well, and the killings have started to happen, sort of focusing on Sydney, which we can work our way. We can hit on some of the good kills as we go along, but I want to take a moment to talk about the cast. So first of all, Nev Campbell. What do y'all think of Nev? I mean, I just want to give away that I think she's like a force of nature. It's sort of strange. We don't see her a lot much
Well, and it's
anymore.
amazing that she was doing Party of Five at the same time she was filming this,
Oh,
and
really?
she would film Party of Five on Monday and Tuesday, and this Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or I think maybe Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday she did Party of Five. But anyway, the point is she did like this all through the weekend and mostly night shoots. And so then she would like Sunday
Jesus.
night she would film all night and then go do Party of Five, like not sleep. It
Oh
was
my
so talk
God.
about a force of nature, man. That's a crazy schedule. But she
That's
does
like
I
great.
Michael
I
J.
think she's
Fox. That's
fantastic.
crazy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, same.
I like her a lot. I mean, I think she's, when we think about like the final girl
Mhm.
archetype, like this is it. Like, and this is her series for the most part. I mean, she's been in every single one of them except for the last one, and I
Right.
think she quits herself pretty well as somebody that keeps getting more and more trauma dumped on her.
Yes.
um and I think she's better. To what you were saying, Jason, I think she's better here than she is in the first one, but she's given him, I think being the survivor of the first film and coming into this movie with that gives her just more to
Yeah.
play off of. Like the first movie, she's a high school girl, and part of the movie she's a tormented high school girl. Here
Yeah.
she gets to be like a grizzled badass at times.
It's so yeah. I mean, so much so that one of the killers says to her, I think Timothy Oliphant says that she has a Linda Hamilton thing going on. That
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing I've been digging actually is the victims in this fight back a lot more. Like
yes,
they're not nearly as helpless. Even in a movie where the tropes are supposed to be part of the meta part of the movie,
yes,
so you would think that, oh, well, it's okay that they don't fight back as much because this is this movie or that movie. And they throw that out
right.
for a lot of the victims in this. And I thought that was actually pretty cool and pretty interesting. Just the fact that, there's lots of kicks and punches that you don't see in many other movies. So that in a lot of slasher movies. So that was actually really cool to see.
I actually have always sort of enjoyed the weird specificity of the way the Ghostface character operates in each of these movies, because he Ghostface, whichever one he is, there's usually two. They're very physical and grunting and falling and tripping, not in a slapstick comedy kind of way, but kind of in a really freakish kind of realistic way. You know,
Well, it's because unlike Jason or Freddy Krueger, like
Yeah,
they're
they're real.
it's a person in a monster costume. Like they're
yes,
Uh-huh.
not
Uh-huh.
supernatural. Like,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
I think that's one of the reasons why it's cool that it's usually multiple killers, because like when you think about like the slasher trope of the killer popping up everywhere, if you transplant that into the real world, you're gonna most likely need more than one person to pull that off.
yes. Yeah, isn't that amazing? Yeah, and so he's always, characters. I might be making this example up, but somebody is liable to hit Ghostface with the freezer door of a refrigerator, and Ghostface will go, huh, and then and fall backwards and then get up and run. They have Ghostface always uses this knife that appears to be made of some sort of diamond steel that will just that
Well,
will
yeah, like
move.
the first kill is Omar Epps, and they kill him through the bathroom stall, and I'm like, good lord, that's like you have to be really strong, and you
Through
have
the
to really good
bathroom
knife
stall, through
through
his
to get
skull.
through, yeah, to get through the bathroom skull and through his skull. I mean, through the bathroom stall and through his skull. Yeah, that was impressive. Which makes me think that that one had to be. Plus, it makes sense that that one had to be Timothy Oliphant that does that one because you have to be really strong, and also he takes over his he takes his jacket and pretends to be him
Yeah.
going back to the theater to sit next to Jada.
It's
So
It's
yeah.
by and large a lot harder to get through a skull bone than any movie ever makes it, by the way.
Well, to be fair,
I
it's
would
going through his
imagine.
ear. It's going through his ear because he's listening. Now, the fact that they know exactly where his ear is going to be, that's unrealistic. But it's like he's listening at the stall because he hears a voice. So probably they're both in there because you hear a woman's voice. And
Well,
then that's when it goes through.
speaking of meta references,
Mm.
that kind of don't get brought up a lot. The weird voice that we'll just say Ghostface because we don't
Yeah.
know which one it is doing. Am I the only one that think that immediately goes back to Black Christmas when you hear like the sort of gibberish?
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think
Yeah.
that, and there's a bunch of there were several telephone movies where people call and affect a voice.
Well,
At
yeah,
least they deal. At
uh,
least they deal with caller ID in this one, which is great.
yes. Oh, that was
Because
great.
Well,
Yeah.
that's what I was going to say about the 90 technology is that I love watching the technology evolve in each of these movies because in the first one they don't have caller ID. So then this time now she has caller ID and she's like, that's the thing. And they have some cell phones, but not
But
that
it's
many cell
still
phones.
novel. The caller
Yeah,
ID
yeah, yeah.
is novel. So she's like, hey, this thing exists. You got to like up your game, asshole, because people are harassing her. Because this poor woman, if we assume for a moment that Sydney is a real person, this poor woman has gone off to college and she's getting harassed all the time by people because they went to watch this movie about her and so they think it's cool to harass her, which sucks and also is like the most believable thing in this whole movie. I mean,
Totally. Can you
I
imagine if this was during the time of the internet, how much she's
oh
getting
my
harassed?
god, can you imagine?
One
She would
thing
have been
that
driven off Twitter already. I mean, there's no way that
well,
she could have
another
made it.
another phone technology thing that people watching this today who are like Gen Zers would have no clue what it was, is when Jada Pinkett goes star 69 his
yeah,
ass, and
yeah,
Yes.
like anybody young is going what the
Yeah,
hell? And
I
it's
think it
just
would be
like
fun to be
call him
like a
back
person.
basically.
I mean, to be like it's 2023. So a 23-year-old born in 2000 watching this, I think would have a really good time watching just what an utterly different world uh that they inhabit, because there's some internet, but basically they live in an analog universe, except for they have cell phones ish, but they're still
Only a
pretty.
few. There's a few enough that they actually say, well, we're checking all the cell phone accounts in the city to see if it could be one of those people.
Yeah,
It's like, what? Obviously, there's not very many if they're doing that because you can't do it if there's thousands.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
Go ahead.
before we get too far away from the opening sequence, because like I know Julia likes it a lot and I like it a
Yeah, yeah,
lot
yeah. Talk
too.
about it. Do remind me
Like,
to get back to Nev Campbell because there's another some things I was thinking about it.
well,
But
we can
yes,
finish
go
up
back to the
talking
beginning.
about Nev. We can finish talking about Nev Campbell and then circle back if you'd rather.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to mention that there's a weird thing going on with her costuming as a character, because Nev Campbell is in theory supposed to be, let's take it for granted that she is an 18-year-old college freshman. And what I think is really funny is that Nev Campbell here at this regular old state school in Ohio dresses like, I don't know, an ad exec or something. She
Is it
wears
supposed to be
this.
Ohio?
Yeah, it's supposed to be Ohio.
Okay,
Which
because
is
it's actually
The
Atlanta.
college is in Ohio.
yeah, the college is supposed to be the fictional Windsor College in Ohio.
Okay,
Huh.
because it's actually in Atlanta.
That is correct.
I
It's
always
actually in
assumed that this
Atlanta.
took place in California, like the rest of them.
It
No,
looks like
because they
California.
actually have some lines in there where they go, "Oh yeah, there were some killings last year in California." For what it's worth. Anyway, yeah, she's in Ohio. There's no reason she's in Ohio. It's not important. That's just I don't know why they picked Ohio. I think
So
it's just
why do you take issue with the way she's dressed?
I don't take issue with it at all. I'm just pointing out that she dresses like a 40-year-old. I mean, she wears these high-waisted slacks and a
She'll wear
leather
blazers.
jacket, and
Yeah. Oh yeah, leather jacket. Right. It's leather
blazers,
jacket.
leather
Yeah, yeah.
jackets. Her hair is always in this sort of like
Well, it's the same haircut that Courtney
that is correct,
Cox
but
had,
Courtney,
basically.
this is not a complaint. I'm just saying they've made a very particular and I think peculiar sartorial choice with Sydney that they are dressing her like somebody who looks more like she has been teaching college for like 10 years than somebody who, in theory, just got out of high school.
I think it's supposed to paint her as somebody that's more mature and
For sure.
serious, because like you have the other sorority girls, kind of, always kind of hovering around her, and they're played as sort of vapid and
Yes.
the
The wonderful Rebecca Gayheart, who is just this Looney Tunes moron with,
Yeah,
you know,
Rebecca Gayheart, who was a model, and she played Dylan McKay's girlfriend slash wife on 90210. And this is just one of my favorite storylines on that show. Her dad is like this kind of mobster type of guy, and he decides for reasons he wants to blow Dylan up, but he accidentally blows up his own daughter instead. So every time I see her, I'm always like, "Oh, R.I.P. character from 90210."
man, delightful, love it. That was an ending, by the way, borrowed straight from Masquerade from Dick Wolf, where they blew up Rob Lowe in a boat. Spoilers for Masquerade. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're supposed to say that before you say the thing. I also should have done that. Spoilers for
Yes,
90210.
spoilers for 90210. All right, but getting back to spoilers for Scream 2. Yes, I believe that she's 24 years old. They're dressing her like she's 34. She's supposed to be 18. It doesn't even matter. We're supposed to subtly watch her and just assume that she sort of floats on a layer that is higher than these kids around her because of everything she's been through. Anyway, continue. Yeah, take us back to the beginning, which is in Windsor. Yes.
So in the opening sequence, and I'll be interested to hear Julia's thoughts about this. The opening sequence with all the people running around in ghost face masks and acting a fool and everything, and watching the movie, and then the actual ghost face coming back and stabbing Jada Pinkett's character to death. And then she has just enough strength to manage to walk up onto the stage in front of the screen and let out this sort of terrible death rattle, and you get to see the from her perspective, like where basically she's looking at the entire audience, and the entire audience is her murderer. At this point, there's something terribly sad about that, but also, as Julia points out, it's also kind of funny. And I think it really, like, if we are to talk about the particular tone of these movies, I think that moment is kind of like, that's a crystallizing moment to me, is like, this is the tone of this, and you're either with that or you're not. And when I talk about something that's fun scary, I think that this is a good example of, like, often when we're talking, when we kind of dance around the different kinds of horror movies, and occasionally I'll say, oh, this was fun scary. Like, this is the kind of thing that I'm talking about. Like, it's such a great image, and it's it makes me just emotional enough to where it's horrific, but not so much that I feel like I have to take a shower afterwards.
Yeah. I just read, by the way, that in a 2018 interview, Jada Pinkett Smith said that she wanted to make her on-screen death one for the record books. She's like, I remember saying to the director at the time, I want to die the most horrific death that has ever happened in a horror film. I want it to be long and excruciating. And Wes Craven was like, yeah, cool, we could do that.
Wow.
But no, yeah, that's the thing, is it's funny because it's so absurd that you could be stabbing somebody a whole bunch of times, moving along, like walking around, stabbing them among all these people, this crowd that's going crazy, and nobody even notices until the person literally climbs up steps. And by the way, that's funny too, because she's been so stabbed that the fact that she could climb up the steps is a little also ridiculous. But it's great. It's fantastic. And then yeah, like for everybody, I love what you said, Drew, about how the whole audience is her killer. That's fantastic. Because yeah, she doesn't know who she's lost him in the crowd.
Well, it's
It's
also
fantastic, and they're all just looking like, is this part of the is this part of the is this a performance? What's going on? It's fascinating.
there's also a couple of films that it's kind of a reference to. I don't know if it was meant as a direct reference, but it's certainly in the DNA of it. One of them Alamo made is a PSA where girl's in front of the screen and she's getting slashed, and the theater goers are coming towards her. They're like climbing over the seats row by row by row to get to her. Then there's movies like Anguish, and I think the whole scene kind of also is influenced by Demons, although that takes place a lot of it in a balcony. But also, this is not a screening
Such a
I
good
would
movie. Yeah.
prefer to go to, by the way, with everybody being so obnoxious. But that's just me.
Yeah, it's like a Rocky Horror.
They're having a really good time, I guess, so that's great. But boy, that's
It's,
not.
it's like a
that's not
Rocky
one
Horror
for me.
Picture Show performance.
Well,
midnight
if
performance.
only there was a way to know for sure. I'm not being sarcastic. I mean, literally, like if there was a way to know, if I go to this show, everybody's going to be in costumes and cutting up and being crazy, and I'm kind of not in the mood for that, so I'm going to go to this show.
Well,
You know,
I can tell you what my litmus test has been over the past few years, especially
Yeah.
pre-COVID. There's a theater where they hold a lot of free screenings. And if they weren't related to like the Draft House or an affiliate, it was a free for all. And I went to a couple. It's cool, it's free. I mean, I'm not, again, your mileage, like what you do is your own thing.
Yeah.
But for me personally, I was like, yeah, I think I'm only gonna go to the free Draft House. Like if it's at the Draft House and I know some people going, as opposed to I don't know, man. I guess it's a more populous theater, and that's fine. But for me personally, I went to a few, and it was like my enjoyment is not the same. Like
I know exactly what you mean,
and that's
absolutely.
And again, if that's what you dig, cool in the gang. Like this is the way I approach going to the movies, right? And there's I've been to cool rowdy screenings where it was like, hey, this is the intent, right? Let's all get together and just have a hoot. Fantastic, awesome. But if I showed up at a theater and it's all people running around stabbing, glow in the dark. And everything's glow in the dark too, so like there's no way you're not just gonna see a cajillion glow in the dark knives along with people throwing popcorn. I mean, it's like a Muppet. It's like the Muppets.
Yes,
as far as like the insanity of the theater.
It's a little crazy, a little unlikely, but it's.
I mean, it's the whole point is they're really pushing this. Which when you told me that, when you tell us that story, Drew, that's a singular moment. I will have to say that rules. So
it was like I said, it's such a crystal clear.
I mean,
as you get older, often things from when you're younger start to get muddled, but that's one of those things that I will always remember.
I mean, you can't not be that, because I mean that is I'm sure how many people definitely thought you planned it, right? Like they had no.
That's brilliant.
People the next day at school, there was a lot of discussion, and a lot of people thought that we planned it, but I'm going on record. This is public record. We did not. It was happy circumstance.
No, I mean that's amazing. I love that's a perfect moment as far as I'm concerned. So, but yeah, like to me, one thing that's interesting though, and we can get back into it. I started trying to look for more information, nerdery on the real background of some of those scenes. Like I said, there's movies, there's cool stuff, like I said, like Demons and Anguish and Fade to Black and stuff like that take place in theaters. And I was trying to see like, those are probably the DNA for scenes like this. But it's strange that I couldn't find just basic kind of Googling. There's a lot of listicles about top things, Easter eggs and whatever, but unless you really dig, there's the things that come up because of the way search engines work now are a lot less of in-depth. Oh, you'll see this 80s horror movie, or you'll see this 70s horror movie bit here and there.
Yeah.
There's a lot less of that and more like, did you know that there's a Freddy sweater? Which is cool. Like, that's cool trivia. But I was kind of frustrated by like trying to find like, oh, what was the movie where the girl's getting slashed and then the people are coming towards her? Like, stuff like that was not part of the discussion in a lot of articles. And I kind of wished, like, especially, you would think there'd be more of that, especially or readily available. Things get buried in a different way due to how searches work nowadays. But it seems like there would be more articles about the nitty gritty of this behind the scenes, DNA bits in a movie specifically about homage and horror and rules and all of that.
Well, it is funny, by the way, that they could probably, without alienating the audience, go a lot harder as far as movie references go. Like, they don't, there's a lot here, but I would say they've toned down the conversation about horror movies from what they had in the last one, which is fine, because I thought a lot
Friday
of
the
their
13th and Halloween.
a lot of their horror talk in the last movie was, I thought, pretty inaccurate anyway. Whereas here, they're more talking about how movies work, about how sequels work and so forth. And that, it felt more accurate to me than before. But there was something that I was going to throw in about this begin. Oh yeah, Julia and I once went to a Halloween show at the Alamo Drafthouse, and I remember people were in costume all over 6th Street, super busy. And then we see this couple that have a costume pair.
I love this story.
So it's a big guy. If I'm remembering correctly, it's a guy dressed as a steak being chased by somebody dressed as a
By a
fork and
couple.
knife.
Yeah, dressed as a fork and knife. And Jason suddenly goes, "What if that guy doesn't actually know those people?"
I mean, because all
That was
of
so
6th
funny.
Street is cheering, right? And we don't know. I mean, that guy could be on his way to his death. I never bothered to check.
Yeah.
So
and then
I don't know.
He was killed by the knife and fork cup. The
By
knife
the
and fork
random
stranglers.
Law
some
and
reason.
Order,
Like, you
like
don't even-
Law and Order opening scene, like the steak, it's just the bloody steak, and then there's like cut to the, they always have to have that one-liner thing, and it's like, I don't like my steaks this bloody or whatever.
Right.
Yep.
I like to think that they don't even use stabbing weapons. It's like the knife and fork stranglers, and everybody's just going like, what? Wouldn't it be like utensils? Like, no, that's how devious and horrible they are.
To get back to the end of that scene leads us into that gives an excuse for the cast that's not hanging out at the college in Ohio to appear. Mainly starting with the ever punchable Gail Weathers, played by Courtney Cox.
And she does get punched twice, so there.
And it sets up a thing that I don't know if it continues in other stories, where Neve Campbell finds a reason to punch her in the face for the second.
Well,
movie
she punches her even in the first movie. Like, that's a callback.
Yeah.
The thing that I find fascinating about Courtney Cox in this part is that she manages to straddle being pretty horrible and exploitive in a lot of her actions, and still manages to come out being kind of likable at times.
Right.
And that's impressive. Like, well,
it helps that she's acting with her husband, and so there's something about the fact that she has this genuine chemistry with David Arquette and her father-in-law. By the way, the chief cop guy, whatever he's called,
is another Arquette
lieutenant.
Yeah.
He's the father of David and Rosanna and Patricia and all the family. So she's acting with. So I think that probably. Just the genuine chemistry that she has with these people probably makes her a little bit
was
more
that just
likable.
us guys? So Julie and I were just really struck that she's acting across from David Arquette, who obviously famously she was in a relationship with at the time. But they really seem to like one another. I mean, it's one of those few times.
Oh, they're adorable.
Yeah, they work great. And he's such a like a weird, he says himself, he says, the way I act does not hide the fact that I'm actually a competent cop. And that turns out to more or less be true, but he's still kind of he's not nearly as cool as she is, but they fit together real well, and you root for them, and that humanizes her so much. Otherwise, she would just
I
be
love
this.
that she says that that the nude pictures of her on the internet are actually her on Jennifer Aniston's body, her head on Jennifer
Yes,
Aniston's body,
No
which
matter
yes,
apparently
how
is
many
actually a
times,
thing.
no matter how many times I've seen this movie, that never ceases to be funny.
That's not,
yes,
yeah, it's always funny. And then David Schwimmer gets mentioned in the film somewhere too, which I thought that was really. Oh, and
yeah,
then the whole thing about oh my god, I'm sorry, I'm so blanking on her name. Sydney says at one point that knowing her luck, Tori Spelling will end up playing her in the movie, and then Tori Spelling ends up playing her in the movie.
yes. It's
That was just so many little things like that that are just hilarious.
in a way, this movie, I feel, Scream 2 is much more plugged into, just in the same way, Tony, as we talked about how it talks about sequels more than horror specificity. This movie is also just plugged into 90s pop culture a lot more than the last movie was.
Yeah.
And that may have to do with its college setting as opposed to its high school. I don't know. I don't know what the excuse is, but it certainly is. With Courtney Cox's outfit, we were talking about how Sydney dresses like a professor. Courtney Cox also, and it just leads me to believe actually that women's fashion, for somebody who wasn't actually actively a student at the time, women's fashion essentially was making you look like, I don't know, a professional, a mom. That there's a weird conservatism going on in the fashions here. Um,
Except for the sort of MTV hair dye that Gail Weathers has going on.
yeah, the streaks, which
Super
they make
favorite.
fun of. Um,
Yeah.
in the last movie, she had this long, lush,
She had
you
like
know,
low lights,
she
like
had
brown
brown
low light.
hair with these sort of golden, what Julia called lowlights, these, this sort of blonde offset. This one, she has this very striking red striped hair, which is super cool. I can't wait to see what becomes of this character in the other movies, because she's fascinating, because she's also the only one who's like actively trying to make bank out of the existence of the Ghostface killer.
Well, apparently she has made some
Yeah.
money, because it's a source of resentment from the other survivors.
Yes.
Particularly Dewey, who doesn't like how as you previously mentioned, like he doesn't like how he was sort of betrayed in her tell-all book that she
Yes.
put out, which is again a very like even just like the sort of I'm gonna put out a true crime book, like that feels very 90s, because I feel like there was true crime stuff before, but I feel like especially with like Inside Edition and Unsolved Mysteries and things like that, I feel like that was a genre that did really explode in the 90s.
Yes. Yeah. So who else has shown up? So Dewey's shown up. Courtney Cox has shown up.
Randy
And
was already there.
Randy, who's played by Jamie Kennedy, he's here just going to join college as a freshman. It's amazing to me that he too looks a hell of a lot older than his high school self, even though, again, literally this film was filmed.
It's 6 months later.
Yeah.
That is when they film it. By the way, okay, so I found this thing that Kevin Williamson said
Mhm.
about the script thing. He says, I think where the urban legend comes in is that I wrote 2 Scream 2 spec scripts. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. He says, there was so much interest in the story that we wrote 3 different endings, because when we were passing out the script for casting, we stopped it at page 75 or 80, wouldn't let anyone else read the ending. Or if they wanted to read the script, they had to come into the office, blah, blah, blah. This is going to get out. This is going to leak. So what I did was, me and my assistant at the time, we wrote a dummy script and had a dummy ending with Dewey as the killer. So that's
Huh.
where it starts, where that whole thing goes. So
Wow.
that's why. Yeah.
Wow. I can't imagine there being. By the way, Dewey's, it turns out he lives, but Dewey's attack that may or may not leave him dead when we're watching it is one of the most harrowing attacks. It is
No, it's
very
horrific.
scary. When he's in that studio, it is
There
it's
is
so
a thing
scary.
a continuity thing that bugs the crap out of me about that scene, though,
Okay.
which is Courtney Cox has her back to the window because she's worried that Ghostface is about to come through the door, which he had been doing, and then Dewey sees her and is banging on this window, which theoretically is soundproof, and so she doesn't hear him. Then he finally, as he's getting stabbed, manages to grab a mic and yell at her so that she turns around. But then when she's like backing up, she can hear Ghostface pounding on the window. So I'm like, well, how come Ghostface pounding she can hear? And maybe it's just that we're hearing it and she's not. But that bugged me anyway. But yes, it was horrific because he's like all this blood going up against the window as he's being stabbed. It's awful.
Yeah, it's awful. I mean, I one thing I love about Dewey though is his, we don't know for sure. We think he's dead. He ends up surviving, but he is the Energizer Bunny. This guy really just keeps on ticking. He's
Well,
already got
there's a lot of
Yeah.
that's part of it that I'm not. It's part of the meta thing, but like, oh, this bullet bounced off my ribs. Oh, luckily
Yeah.
that knife went through scar tissue. There's, I don't know. I mean, I watch movies. I mean, I watch all kinds of action movies where people take way more damage than they possibly
Yeah.
than human bodies can take. So it's not that big a deal, but it is like, I think that's why I was never really gung ho. Is everything I saw and then everything kind of ancillary kind of stuff coming out about these movies was really like super cheeky about a lot of it. And it just didn't seem like my bag. Now, again, these are really like, there's really great slasher movie stuff in them, but that's part of why I was never like, yeah, I gotta see these Scream movies.
Yeah.
Which
Well, and
is,
it could
again, that's my own
fandom.
personal thing because I watched a lot, different meta stuff. So I don't know.
Well, when something becomes like a real because the timing of if something becomes a real sort of Tumblr hit, and so everybody starts making memes about it, and you sort of or I guess in 1997, just maybe circulating online funny puns and lists about this thing that you're into. All of the kind of themes will get elevated to sort of a fandom thing that you'll even come to recognize, even if you're not in that fandom or have even watched that stuff. And it sounds usually, cheeky is a good way to put it. It usually sounds so over the top by the time it reaches t-shirt level, I'm with Dewey, whatever, that you're like, I don't want to join that party. That party's already
I
been going
think
for 5 years.
honestly though, because like fan culture really wasn't at that level in the 90s, at least not where I was living. Like you didn't have suddenly a bunch of, like, if you wanted a t-shirt that had any kind of like horror movie character on it, you would have to wait until Halloween and hope that they would put it out. But like,
I don't know
special
about
order, like zines. Sometimes you could get catalogs, like, or metal catalogs actually.
But I
If
remember
you
in the 90s, in
like,
the X-Files fandom being just bonkers online. Like
yeah,
lots of websites and message boards and
X-Files fandom, sure,
emails.
but like what I think of as like fan culture the way it is now, where you would have just suddenly like a flood of fan art and things like that. That didn't really exist back in the 90s.
well, there was nowhere to really publish it or get it out. That was the difference. Is people were writing fan fiction, which ended up being on blogs and stuff like that. But there wasn't a good way. I mean, there wasn't DeviantArt in that era, or there were ways to release, like, to get art out there, and there were ways to get fiction out there, but you had to still kind of search for it. But again, like you're saying, like, if you wanted a t-shirt or whatever, there were like metal catalogs, or in the back, most of it, like everything was in black and white, are the same kind of tape trading zines that existed at the time, where that was the place where gorehounds could find, guinea pig and all the stuff where you're like, what is this even, and you paid an exorbitant amount for a third generation tape, but that was the way you got stuff. But I think that's also part of, again, why I wasn't initially as interested. And this is, it'll sound kind of gatekeepery, but I think I was just old enough that I felt like I had been fighting for the horror wars for long enough that the idea of this, like, the way that they say some things and the way that they approach it, felt like you're still kind of making fun of the movies I like.
I'm with you.
And I was kind of resistant to that idea of like, oh, well, now you're just kind of, the approach to it was not what I wanted to see. And, coming back to it now, I go, well, it's a little smarter than I thought. And, I came around a little bit, but I definitely at the time I wasn't interested in everybody's horror is back, and I'm like, well, it's not really like
Also,
Scream
it hasn't
horror
been
is back.
gone.
Deconstruction of horror is back, and
If you're a
I
horror
felt
fan, you've already been there all this
Yeah.
But
time.
this
Like, you didn't
did
go
this
anywhere.
did resurrect the slasher. Like I think
Oh, absolutely.
specifically
Absolutely.
slasher movies got the boost because like I think about horror prior to this, and when I think about 90s horror, leading up to this, what I do think about a lot is the sort of like really big budget, like the stuff that was kicked off by the Coppola Dracula movie, like
Mhm, mhm.
really big budget with A-list stars, and it's usually like a redo of like a gothic character. And this, the flip side of what you're saying, and I'm not saying anything you're saying is wrong, but
Mhm.
like the flip side is somebody that was very much the target audience for this because I was a teenager when these came out. This felt like something that was mine,
No, I
and
totally
like
get it.
yeah, like because like I had my older brother's generation, which had been like forcing Star Wars down my throat for like
Yeah.
most of my life, and like this was something that was like put out specifically for our age group, and it was there it spoke to it on a certain level that I feel like and I do understand like you saying like, oh, this felt like this was possibly making fun of the movies that I like. My reaction wasn't like that, because like my reaction was like, well, this is a celebration of horror movies.
I get it. And again, this is kind of this is a difference. Like I feel that I have several touchstones like that. For example, like when Power Rangers came out, there's a ton of people who love Power Rangers and like Toku shows now. Like that's what grew them.
Yeah.
But I was old enough that I didn't want to see Power Rangers. I just wanted them to release the stuff straight from Japan.
Yeah.
All I wanted, that was my I was just old enough that I had seen Space Giants and I had seen what not so great dub stuff was, right? And that by the time I was like, oh, cool, these Ranger shows I've been hearing about are coming out. And then I watched, and half of the show would be, re-edited, reshot. And I was like, oh, well, this isn't really for me, I felt, because all I want to do was see these shows. And by the time for example, by the time Scream 2 comes out for me, and I totally get where you're coming from, Drew, but for me, I was already like, had moved to Austin, and I love video, and I had, all the stuff, and I've been, digging through horror movies in the VHS era. And so part of it did feel, I was just on that cusp where it felt like, you say it's popular, but it's what you're saying is popular feels like you're kind of talking down to me a little bit.
Well, also,
that was my own thing. Now, again, like I said, I'm a lot softer on it now. Like I see kind of what I was missing, but that's why I didn't actively.
And
like,
I'm not saying that you're wrong. Like,
oh no, well, it's reciprocal, right?
It's
you being in high school. If I had been in high school, I was coming out of college in '95, right? So like the difference. That's one of those things. I think I've said it before too. I don't want to get too far off the rails, but what I find fascinating myself is, growing up with Saturday morning cartoons. There's a way, depending, because your memory for that is so kind of short and of its time, but when you age out, and I aged out of cartoons a lot later because I just love cartoons, but what your Saturday morning cartoons are is a really great way to hone in on how old you are. By the way, or now, if you even remember Saturday morning cartoons,
yeah, if you even have,
like, were you a Johnny Quest? Were you Dungeons and Dragons? Were you Rubik's The Amazing Cube? Were you Monchi Cheese?
Smurfs,
were you
baby.
all these like Smurfs? There's such a window in that because you age out so fast.
That's right.
That kind of pop culture stuff is what I'm fascinated in. That there's generational shifts that change how you perceive. I think neither of us are right or wrong, but that was how I approached these, and why I'm a first timer to the series.
Well,
and I try not to be too gatekeeper. Like, it sounds like really gatekeepery in a way, but it was just how my perception of how that was at the time.
I also think the first two Screams also unleashed and I'm sure we're going to talk about this a lot over the next coming weeks, but it unleashed a lot of terrible rip offs.
I just want to. I have a question about
that.
really quickly. Can you name? I bet you can. But this movie comes out just 2 months after yet another movie just like this that was also from a Kevin Williamson script.
I Know What You Did Last Summer.
I Know What You Did Last Summer. So bam, bam, bam. Like on average, like 8 months apart. Scream, I Know What You Did Last Summer, Scream 2. Like this sets a tone for the whole
not just
next
that,
10 years.
But any movie poster from around there starts to get kind of nebulous, like which franchise you're talking about.
Yes.
I would say there's a lot of 90s horror that fits well within these, the late 90s moving on. The way it's lit has a certain the way, again, because you've got all these, because you're also going, hey, these are the popular actors and actresses of the time. You got a lot of interchangeability in that too. So you start to see kind of your stock, the Brat Pack, the new Brat Pack, or the new horror Brat Pack, in fact, right? Like it's very analogous to that.
They really are. These people like Freddie Prinze and Sarah Michelle Gellar and Nev Campbell. Nev Campbell, by the way, always has a certain like above. I'm not knocking Nev Campbell, but there's an above it all kind of thing about her where she, with the most recent movie as an example. I'm sure she could use a hit film, but she's like, I've got a price. If you're not going to hit it, fuck you. I'm not interested. And, she's always just sort of been just perfectly capable of going,
Is that wrong though for her to advocate for what she's
not wrong at all. That's what I'm saying. Nev Campbell always decide. You get the impression Nev Campbell beats her own drummer, like she can do whatever. No, it's not wrong. That by the way, my feeling, I also feel that way about the WGA strike right now. People negotiate. You negotiate for what you value, and if and she is not wrong at all, not in the slightest. Why should we expect her to take less if she doesn't want to?
Well, especially with these movies, which she really is the face of this franchise. Definitely is, as much as you think about like Courtney Cox and David Arquette, like you definitely think about Nev Campbell first and foremost.
Also, enemies can become friends. That you'd be surprised. People can make up, and she could come back
in Hollywood.
Yeah, she can come back if the character is not dead. They made a point, even in Scream 6, which I have seen. I haven't seen anything in between this one and that one, but they make a point in Scream 6 to say, I talked to Sydney. She's
your next viewing of Scream 6 will be so much better having seen the other movies.
I can't wait.
It's so much better if you've seen the other movies.
Can I ask a question about getting back to where Tony was going with the posters and the way these movies go and the Brat Pack and the same characters, and Kevin Williamson is writing every script in town. Why do these movies, please forgive me if I've asked this before, but I don't understand. This movie looks like a 90s movie. What the hell is that about? I'm not talking about the high-waisted jeans. I mean, the film looks, there's a look that is different from the 80s.
It's like a brightness to it.
Yeah.
And what's going on?
And I think some of it comes from film. Like, again, there's filmmakers who will go, you could research this and this. It's the way that it's lit and how they choose to frame things. But I also think that if you watch, there is a want. Again, one of the filmmakers could go, Tony, that is not what we were doing. You're an idiot.
Okay.
But it feels like, as a viewer, that because so many of the shows that people were watching had a certain look, that TV and film still looks like film.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a slight change towards they're a little bit closer in their look, in my opinion. Like,
That's
as I watch years later, kind of putting this all together. But there is, I think, that the temperature of the film is, and I say that by film stock look.
Yeah.
Whether it's blue or white, or the temperature as in lumens, and however you want to measure it. Like there's a brightness to it that you'll get in this film. I mean, this is prime example. Most of it's in the day, so much of it's in the daylight.
It's a good point.
Some of it is in bright sunlight. How people interact is in that, but just the flavor of acting at the time as well. Not
Mm.
I'm not saying plus or minus. It's just there's, different time periods have different ways that people are acting, and what's the popular thing at the time, and who those actors and actresses are. Again, kind of going back to that.
I mean, if
But
you
I
think of
really
like,
feel like those things define that kind of 90s look.
yeah, I mean, I guess so. I mean, certainly there's fashion, but I think you're right. To me, there's something about the grain, but it's not grainy. This isn't 70s grainy.
No, no, no,
But there's
no.
something about the texture of the film and the lighting, and remember, this is still a point where if you're going to film outside, you have outside of the frame giant Death Star sized lights causing,
But
Jerry
but
O'Connell can be seen, and
different technology too. Like
yeah,
different technology. We're not at complete digital cameras. We're not everybody's not shooting red,
yeah,
yet. But again, technology improvements, and just there's a style, and
yeah.
also there's a style to what we see as popular.
Mm,
So if you're going to say, like, if you're going to make I know what you did last summer, you're going to make a bunch of different kind of derivations of this. The formula was take a lot of popular actors and actresses who may have either a teen audience or late teen audience, whatever,
yeah.
and put them in these movies, and we're going to create these kind of ensemble casts, and it has a look and feel of flavor. This is what's popular, so you keep doing what's popular. And I think a lot of 90s horror, that's a really broad brush, though, because
Yeah.
like anything, when we say like, oh, this has a very 90s horror look, there's a lot of stuff being created.
Well, this
For
is
sure.
Not that.
this definitely has enough of a look to win, because when a couple of years back when Netflix did those Fear
Street.
Street movies, which were referencing the look of
Mhm.
this, like there's enough of a look here that someone can do a pastiche
I
of
guess I
it.
need to
Yeah, yeah,
watch
yeah.
that. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
sounds.
I
that
think
sounds-
I think that you'll take that, after revisiting Scream, you'll take some things, because again, like the first one of those is a pastiche of these kind of movies, the same way the second one is a pastiche of like Friday the 13th movies.
Oh,
And
interesting.
I think that is because, like, that's a particular flavor. Another thing, talking about though what makes this feel like a 90s movie is the
This is such. Can I just say this is such a fun topic? I really
Soundtrack
enjoy.
also, by the way.
yeah, exactly. Well, that's exactly what I was about to say, is
Yeah.
the sound, because I don't know what the first movie that really utilized putting like a lot of like MTV friendly music onto a soundtrack, but I always think of The Crow first, but I know surely that's not the first one.
It can't
But
rain
that
all
was
the
a
time.
yeah, Batman Forever. Batman Forever is another one. Like, this was something like every movie had to have a soundtrack tie-in. This
Mhm.
movie actually uses the sort of soundtrack drop movements, I think, a lot better than I think. Like, there's a lot of movies where I feel like the pop music is kind of shoehorned in. This movie, I think, again, probably in part because it is about young people, but also because there's some decent editing here. Like, I always think back when I think of the way pop music is used in a movie, there's a point where Ghostface has just killed Sarah Michelle Gellar, and they have like the
Mhm.
slow-mo, like, this is now iconic of that character, but the slow-mo thing of him cleaning off his knife, and that Everclear song comes up. And
Yeah.
like, look, I'm not like the world's biggest Everclear fan, so don't mistake me, but that's a good musical transition. Like,
Well,
it fits into the scene well.
the other part is really having, not that, I mean, soundtracks, there's a lot of great horror movies with very contemporary soundtracks.
Yes.
And I'm going to go back with, having Fastway do the Trick or Treat soundtrack. Fantastic.
Yeah.
But what you see, another thing that defines this is extremely like that year of kind of contemporary soundtrack, and a lot of it. So we are starting to see where the studios have decided, like, well, I'm Sony. Why don't I put more Sony artists in my movies? Like, this
Yeah.
is how, you know, eventually we get 360.
Yeah,
videos.
yeah.
And-
Well, like this isn't like Return of the Living Dead, where you have like a bunch of like mostly underground punk
Right.
and metal artists on a thing. Like this is like stuff that would be playing on 120 minutes, like the following weekend. Like it's very MTV.
that synergy of MTV, that you know, buzzword bingo there, but like you're starting to see this. Wait, I'm the studio, so a lot of it's licensed, but we're heading towards that. A Sony picture will use Sony artists, and we're going to promote the latest Sony artist. Now, this has been done all the time, but it starts to ramp up because you have an MTV generation that sees this isn't just like, oh, we're going to get Dokken to do Friday the 13th 3, because that sounds cool. It's a, here's an Everclear song that's popular right around now. Let's make sure that we capitalize on that. And I think it leads back, one of the first more memorable ones of tying stuff back in our generation and move forward is the People Are Strange drop in Lost Boys.
Boys.
But what the difference is, that was
an Echo of the Bunnymen
older song, right? Quote unquote.
Yeah.
It's not a cover, if I remember correctly.
No, it was a cover.
It was. Yeah, that's right. It was a cover.
But I just want to mention, this movie uses a song that was used. That they've started to make. I mean, think of it. It's so funny. You have the responsibility of making a movie too, and you got to start figuring out what is our brand. And Red Right Hand becomes the brand.
Boy, if I never hear that song, it's a great song. If I never hear it in the soundtrack again,
this is where like I Scream gets a pass because they did it first.
Yeah, no, and there's some good uses, but that's one of the songs that if I never hear it in a soundtrack,
that's how Jason feels about Creep.
Yes, we've been talking about Creep and also Piano Man, frankly. But
where's this overabundance of Piano Man? Wait a second.
You're gonna have to explain that, Jason.
I don't.
The ones that I feel are overused are Creep and Hallelujah by
Hallelujah, definitely.
Certainly Hallelujah. Yeah,
I can live my whole damn life without hearing Hallelujah again. And here's the funny thing: I'll post online, and I'm sure this would be true of Red Right Hand. I'll post, I can live my whole life without having to hear Hallelujah again. I know it's a good song. I'm just sick of hearing it. And people will come on my timeline to do nothing but argue with me that it's a good song. And I'm like, no, man.
No, the song is good. There's tons of I agree with you. But geez, Red Right Hand is like,
yes.
Is it cheap to license?
I don't know.
I think
the reason people love it though, I think that whole the sort of clangy stuff, it just sounds really good.
It sounds great. And Hallelujah is an amazing song.
Yeah.
Although bondage in your I've seen it sung at churches. It's like my sister loves it, and I'm like, yes, you've read 50 Shades of Grey, but I don't think you're really listening to the lyrics there.
Or Take Me to Church.
I was going to say Take Me to Church, also another one that somehow people can sing without actually hearing the lyrics. That's true.
I don't know.
People only listen to the chorus.
I guess.
Take Me to Church.
If there's one thing I've learned from living with someone who writes songs, she has a song about smoking marijuana, and it says, "Hey, Miss Mary," and everything in it. Jamie's mother's name is Mary, and she thought that song was about her.
Oh my!
Well, yeah. I thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that, because that's an excellent one. Yeah, Red Right Hand. X-Files, by the way, used it. It looks like the first movie to use it was Dumb and Dumber, interestingly enough.
That makes no sense to me somehow.
But Scream really owns it. I mean, Scream,
it is the theme. It is the Scream theme.
It is the theme. Was there a Scream TV series? And if so, was this the theme? Did they use this?
No.
Well, they should have. That's why I haven't heard of it. I mean,
Scream TV series was really good for 2 seasons, and the 3rd season we shall not talk about. but that's neither here nor there, because that's not something that we should spend the time. I would not suggest that we would spend the time visiting that for this retrospective, because that would eat up a lot of our week.
Really funny. Well, I mean, I went back and watched the Firestarter TV series just because somebody had to. And all I can say about it is that it is exactly the cable supernatural series that you expect. I mean, it's
Sure.
it's
Yeah.
like if I say to you that's what it is, you'd be like, oh yeah, no, I know what that's going to be like, and that's what it is like. In fact,
So-
Offline though, I still want to hear this like overuse of Piano Man. Like, what are all these movies? The Piano Man
I think I
extended
shouldn't have
universe.
picked on Piano Man. I got sick of hearing Piano Man because I felt like, at least in the 90s, like I was hearing that song way too much. But it's not like every movie was playing the Piano Man, because it's a rather specific song. But yeah.
I have getting us back to the movie.
Oh,
I
yeah,
have a
sure.
question about
Yeah.
something. So
Okay.
David Warner has a small part in this, the great David Warner. And I have always felt like that seems like that's like Wes Craven's self-insert.
Okay, thank you.
character To me.
Yes, let's talk about that scene.
I'm kind of down with that.
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah, Wes Craven did choose him according to the IMDb because he was impressed with his acting. But I mean, that's the only reason.
I mean,
like
David Warner in and of himself has been in enough horror movies to where I feel like him just being in something is another horror movie reference. But
Sure.
Yes,
But-
it's so
Absolutely.
good. Him as this director talking to her about acting, which is thank goodness, because we need something in here about, if that's her major and if the finale is going to be in the theater, we need something. And so what they give us is two things: David Warner talking all directory to her, and then where she acts in a rehearsal of Cassandra. Both of those are like they're out of a
How
whole different movie.
Evil, by the way, to make her be in a scene where people in masks are stabbing her, like a bunch of them.
Yeah, it is
That
pretty
is
fucking- yeah.
crazy. I was like, "There's no way." That is-
Apparently she consented to that, because like she made it all the way to dress rehearsal.
That's
yeah,
true.
but I'm just saying that was mean.
That sounds like the really kind of like putting the bad director kind of,
Yes. Yeah.
into the forefront of like, well, if you'll do it for art, like what's wrong with you?
That's when you
man?
become aware
And
that
that's-
she is a
and I think
hot.
that- and that- I
Explains
actually
what's
kind of
wrong
like
with him. He
that.
says that he has no understudy.
Yes. Well, and that's when you realize that Sydney is not a 30-year-old professor. She's an 18-year-old girl who can be manipulated by a professor. And that's when I, as a dad, feel most sorry for Sydney, because she's clearly so susceptible to this professor's talk.
But what a beautifully staged scene! Like
Oh God, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Fantastic.
all
Really
the
was,
reds.
yes.
Oh, I
and
wouldn't
the
lose it for all the
lights.
world. It's great. Yeah, it's really
gore.
good.
It's one of my favorite scenes, and it's to me one of the creepier Ghostface scenes, even though nobody died, because just the
It's
way
wonderful.
he's lurking around, and you're not even,
There's
you're not
whispering.
even sure.
There's weird.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we're
oh,
not sure
so
if
good.
she actually saw him or if she's imagining
Yeah,
it.
that could
Yeah.
just be her trauma coming
And also,
out.
by the way, Nev Campbell does this sort of roundhouse kick that that was just astonishing to me. I mean, it was just amazing that actor is that
Yeah, she probably has some
athletic.
dance training. I wouldn't be surprised.
I'm sure that there are
I
listeners.
didn't go to college.
yelling
I
at
have
us
to
for that.
ask. I'm gonna have to ask a question to my more learned.
I'm so excited
colleague
about
here.
whatever the hell this question is going to be. Go ahead. What? Yeah.
This college theater seems really well appointed and very well budgeted to me. Is that realistic?
Sure, absolutely. Even our high
Okay.
school is like that. The high school that my kid
Okay.
goes to. Yeah,
It can
absolutely.
be, yeah. Like not every place, but yeah, depending on where you're at, it didn't seem out of place for what it could be.
Mhm.
Especially
Well-
if you chose to go to a place for a theater program,
Yeah.
you'd
Yep,
most
absolutely.
likely get something
Yeah.
like this.
No, my the school that Cass is going to go to for college has the best theater in all of Chicago, and it's part of the university.
Oh, okay,
So
right on.
yeah, absolutely.
That actually brings up another thing about these movies that I feel like so like when you look at the Wes Craven's catalog, like the movies that he did, and then you had like I guess his meta period, which like I guess started with New Nightmare, Wes Craven's New Nightmare, but that movie didn't work for people quite the way the Scream movies did. And when I was revisiting these movies this time around, I think I hit on why. Because they're both nominally about horror movies invading the real world in this like strange way. But Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which I do think is technically a more sophisticated movie than this, but I think because it is nestled very much in the Hollywood machine, and it's not about like there's a middle classness about the Scream movies that I feel like makes these movies a little bit more approachable than New Nightmare was.
I hadn't thought about that. How inside Hollywood New Nightmare is.
Well, it's also very specific to Nightmare, whereas you can get a broader audience by simply the fact that Scream is about horror, the genre, and not horror, the
Freddy Krueger.
Right? Like
I think that annoyed. It's weird how we
narrows
changed.
it.
Yeah, because that was annoying to me 15 years ago, and it's not annoying to me now. I can't even understand how it changed, but I'm much more open to this now than I was then. Whereas I used to be a purist for New Nightmare.
Well, and New Nightmare's great. I'm not saying that that's wrong that it's nestled in the movie business that way. That's the only way that movie could work. But that movie was not a financial success, and these were. And even though the recipes are kind of the same, I think, what Tony is talking about is that, Scream gave the 90s their own horror icon in Ghostface. Like like Freddy Krueger and Jason, like they both belong to the 80s in this very specific way. Like this was a fresh horror movie villain that people could latch onto. But aside from that, again, I think it's because like this is people can relate the fact that these are normal people. They're going to call, Gail Weathers is the only one that has kind of an out of the norm job, and that she's a journalist of sorts. Like everybody else is more, I hate to keep saying normal, but more normal. And I think that is partly why these movies were more successful.
No, you're absolutely right. Yeah, good.
Also, regardless of what I thought about, why I didn't gravitate to these movies, Ghostface as an icon, like you're talking about, super marketable. I mean, to the point they parody it. Like how marketable it is part of this movie, which is pretty good, pretty genius in itself. The fact that you could get the costume, that's accurate. It's easy enough to reproduce regardless. And the fact you could get one to go to the movie theater when you want to see this movie, I mean, that's genius, right?
It's simple too. Like I think one of the reasons why it's creepy is that it's such a simple look.
Yes.
Like it's cheap but effective, and like they didn't really even get stylized with the masks at all until the most recent one.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, like the new one has like the sort of desiccated Ghostface mask, whereas all the rest of them, like they kept the look of the costume pretty much the same, throughout. And I think that helps.
I made a comment a couple of weeks ago that I said that this was essentially this is America's longest Edvard Munch joke. That this is a reference. It's a direct reference to this famous painting by Edvard Munch. And what I think is most kind of cool about that is
nobody mentions it.
Nobody mentions it. Nobody ever says, "Oh yeah, like the painting by Edvard Munch." Nobody.
I've had that conversation with friends, but it definitely has never come up in any of the movies.
And you'd think it would, since
in the first movie,
college students.
Yeah, in the first movie, is it Matthew Lillard? Is that his name?
Yes.
He says something is a scream, like it's funny, And I was like, oh, hey, that's the name of the movie. But that's the only time that anybody mentions the word.
It's a prime, as cheeky as they get with a lot of things.
Yeah.
You could actually put the painting in the museum at the college here.
Yes.
Or
just in a poster in somebody's room.
Never, not once. There are That actually, it's funny. I'd love to
Maybe
go back
maybe
and
because that would be talking about fine art, and these movies are definitely more about a
But
conversation about low
but
art.
why not make that juxtaposition? What's
Yeah.
art?
Fair.
And they don't do that, which is surprising. And again, maybe it's just because, like, you know what? If nobody's picking up on it, let's just go. Right?
Yeah.
That could be
Well,
it.
it does. I will say the first movie wasn't shot under the name Scream. It was shot under the name Scary Movie, and then they
Really?
changed it later on. And then,
Right.
of course, we got the Scary Movie franchise.
Well, and the second movie was shot under the name Scream the Sequel, which I think is a great name.
If you
Sure.
had this killer and it was a female and she was wearing kind of a habit and it sort of looked like the Mona Lisa, everybody would call it the Mona Lisa killer. And you would know that that was a reference. So it may be possible that Edvard Munch's Scream is just slightly below the line of
Well, Munchface doesn't flow like Ghostface. I mean, I think there's your real answer, right?
yeah.
Like, what's a Munchface? Is it cereal?
I know what a
is a-
munch face is, and I don't think that's what we want the movie to be about.
I think I
Is it
just
cereal? I
downloaded
don't
the
know.
wrong Scream
That's
movie.
funny.
I think we just hit on why
Yeah.
Oh,
it's
that's so funny.
Ghostface.
That's really funny.
I really admire though. It's so funny to me. that
you
Wes-
know,
go ahead.
sorry,
No,
sorry,
please.
Jason.
Yeah, go crazy.
It kind of makes me want to just be a jerk and call it Munchface to people. Like, no, it's not. Like, because I had a friend who annoyed somebody really badly because they were kind of being disingenuous, like they were like very much. He just kept calling. I think if I remember correctly, he called him Friday the 13th. Called Jason like, and then Friday the 13th. He was like, it's not Friday the 13th. His name is Jason. My friend knows.
He just kept calling the bad guy Friday. That is
Oh my
really
god, I
funny.
love which movie is it? Is it this one or the other one or the first one that has the thing where he's like, I think it's the first one, right? Where he's like, which one's your scary movie? And then because it's the boyfriend is out.
Yeah,
on
yeah,
the,
yeah.
by
It
the
was.
piano.
you're
And he's
talking
like,
about Drew Barrymore.
he's like, okay, who's the killer? Okay, now I'm gonna quiz you. Who's the killer? Yeah, Drew Barrymore. Who's the killer in Friday the 13th? And she's like, Jason, and he's like, no. She goes, it's Jason. It's
Although that was frustrating to me because now everybody's like gatekeepery, so it's like it just feels like, oh, you like
I
the
can't
horror
wait
movies.
for you to see the I can't wait for you to see Scream 5 if you
Okay,
like
it just
Ghostface's toxic fandom is
Awesome.
is a thread that they build upon.
oh,
Love
I
it.
mean, and again, that makes it the cool meta thing that it is. And I say cool now because I kind of had, again, like Jason said, I softened, I've softened to exactly. I've realized what it is and kind of softened to that a bit more.
Isn't that interesting? I think age
don't know.
plays something in it. Like I'm not as punk rock as I probably was at some point, and uh, and Wes Craven too. Like we were talking about this, how Wes Craven. Think about this: Wes Craven being the guy who brought us Last House on the Left, right? And that is nobody would accuse that of being anything but boundary pushing and rough and hard to suffer through. And this movie is violent, but it's extremely palatable. It's what Joe Bob would have called indoor bull stuff, right? It is, and it's the pinnacle of it. It's like
Well, no, I
defining
think
the
the
culture.
pinnacle of indoor bull stuff wouldn't be a horror movie at all. Like I think
Well, that's probably true. That's a good
it would
one.
be it would be like a dramedy or something.
Sure.
Mm.
But this is horror movie as basically leading culture.
It's a multiplex movie. It's
Yeah.
it's not a grindhouse movie. It's definitely a popcorn movie.
I mean, it's not Wes Craven's first time going legit. He's been legit at this point, and when this movie comes out, he's been legit for a long
I
time.
mean, he made a freaking movie with Eddie Murphy a few years
Yeah.
before this came out. That's as mainstream as it gets in the 90s. Like
Yeah. I'm just saying it's really interesting to see that arc. We
Well,
did, by the
I think
way, we
that's
did
one of the
another.
reasons why he had in some ways had a more successful career than, like, say, Romero or Carpenter, which I think people would almost say are more pure auteurs
Yeah.
in some ways than Craven, because I think Craven was able to adapt and evolve within the Hollywood machine. And I'm not saying either is wrong. Like I got respect for both ways of playing the game, but like you definitely had somebody that was much more comfortable swimming upstream
Oh yeah.
in Hollywood, and Craven was
Even
that
doing
guy.
stuff like what I would regard as kind of a for hire movie like Red Eye, which is good, but it doesn't need Wes Craven,
No,
like that's a fine film. Don't get me wrong, it's a fine film, but it could have been directed by any action director.
this though, like for whatever reason, I don't think that these movies were he didn't have to keep coming. He did every single one of these until he died. And
Yeah.
that's something he definitely did not have to do. Like he could have retired or a wealthy man. And like so I think they're obviously, it's interesting to me that he did all of these to a point.
They're
and
very
not
unique, and I'm glad that he, in a sense, he made something that was really unique to him, that molded his time as a director, as a Hollywood culturally forefront director and a horror aficionado, and he created something very memorable. And that's
it's
I
a
mean,
leg that's a that
good on
like
Wes, man. I mean, that's
yeah,
great.
that was
That's
well.
really great.
Even if you had just done Scream, like you would, that's a nice
Yeah.
legacy for yourself. And then you go back and think about like The Hills Have Eyes, Last House on the Left, Nightmare on Elm Street. Like like talk about leaving your stamp on a genre because
Yeah.
you could stop at any one of those things and be like, okay, I've made my imprint. This is somebody that made their imprint multiple times.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, I know we're going on rather long in this conversation, but directing back to something that specifically happened in the movie, there is a scene towards the end of this film. You want to talk about, like, for me, like a pure suspense scene, like after that horrific car crash where the poor cop is like pinned under the window shields, and you see like his head halfway through the window and he's like shaking as he dies. There's that whole sequence of the two like Sydney and her roommate having to crawl over the unconscious
that's great, isn't it? Yes.
face. It's so scary, and like almost nothing happens. But
it's
like,
pure
Except that he
suspense.
disappears. Well, he disappears after she comes back to see if he's actually dead. He's gone.
But that's after. I'm talking about the sheer.
This is Halloween style Carpenter,
terrible.
Jamie Lee Curtis crawling around Michael when he's unconscious.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and then she honks the horn by accident and everything.
Oh,
it's like the equivalent of landmine scenes in a World War II movie, where it's like,
so good.
I can't get how we're gonna get your foot off, or how are we gonna, all that kind of, or like stepping through that, like that level of suspense. It really clever.
One of the best
impressed.
scenes in, I think, a 90s horror film, honestly, and almost nobody talks about it. Like I like everybody talks about the opening, and as well they should, because the opening is amazing. But like if you want to talk about like something that like got me on the edge of my seat like the first time I watched it, and then like still kind of does, because it's like it's like Jaws. It's like when you're in the cage with the shark, like they're in this caged area with this dangerous thing, and like the level of vulnerability there is just terrific.
It makes me aware, you said that, and by the way, there is no you're right about being trapped with Jaws in a thing, but I mean, the idea of like sneaking around an unconscious shark is such a fascinating concept. But it makes me realize this is a good scene to rip off. Like I've got to look for opportunities to do this, where the person has to sneak around with a violent thing that has been knocked out. Like, obviously, this is, I think Wes Craven is tipping his hat to John Carpenter here, with Jamie Lee Curtis dealing with the unconscious Michael. But it's so cool, and yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a runaway scene, and in fact, we should jump to whatever else is a. We haven't mentioned we haven't mentioned the killers, and we probably should, because I know that we've been going for a super long time.
I mean, well, that's the choice. Do we want to, or do we want to let people continue to? Like, I know we say
fine
spoilers,
with
but
it. Like if somebody hasn't seen this movie by now, like
yeah,
like,
why are you listening?
and to me, the killer. I will say this though, like Timothy Olyphant. Am I saying that name right?
I think it's Oliphant.
Just Oliphant.
Oliphant.
Yeah, Oliphant.
His performance aside, which I do think is him playing a psychotic, he's pretty good. But to me, the killers are the least interesting thing about the killers in this
agreed.
movie.
Totally agreed.
Like they're they're fine.
In other words,
You
it has
know.
to be somebody, but you don't really care who it is.
Well,
Is-
to me, like you have this sort of overarching character, like the persona of Ghostface, which is something that like when you are acting as Ghostface, you take on certain characteristics. Like Ghostface has a personality distinct in of himself. And I don't really care who is under the mask. Other than like the first movie is really the only time I really cared. Like after that, like yeah, some of the killers once the reveal has happened, like they're more entertaining than others. I think out of the
Go ahead.
yes, no.
Well, finish your sentence, and then I'll just.
I feel like out of the two here, I like Mickey. I think that's his name. I like Mickey better. Like his rationale about how he wants to become famous because of the trial is very, very 90s.
And them doing I'm gonna call her Jackie, even though it's Mrs. Loomis is her character's name, but her being one of the killers, it's just she's just getting revenge for her son supposedly, whatever. It's an homage to the Friday the 13th, to the real
Excellent
to
point.
Jason's mom.
Yeah.
And so but what I loved about the first movie is because like Jason said, we rewatched the first movie. In that movie, like once you watch it back through, knowing who the killers are, it the whole time you're like, yeah, how did I not see it? It's super obvious because they always are kind of bouncing off each other, literally and figuratively. They're just kind of they're teaming together on everything. They're always just kind of in sync with each other. These two characters have nothing. Like they met on Craigslist or whatever, like it's classified
Like
as
it sounds
psycho
like
killer or
the
something.
dark web or something.
And I was like, yeah, exactly. But there's no such thing. It's like, oh, really? There's newspaper ads that you can take out.
Missed connections. I
Exactly.
also would like to be a killer, and I was at Starbucks.
So yeah, I'm just thinking like that to me didn't fit
Do
at
you
all.
like scary movies,
Yeah,
hunting knives,
exactly.
and rubber masks?
Yeah, missed connection. Heard you like these. Overheard your conversation at
Mozart's
Jiffy
Coffee
Lube.
Roasters, yeah.
Yeah, and call me. I was there too. I love masks and killing.
Oh man. So for me, her motive. So I guess you're right, Drew. Her motive is sort of pedestrian, whereas his is very nice. It's his Timothy Oliphant's concept is silly, but what I thought was interesting is that, yeah, it is very of the moment. Like his whole thing about it's all about the trial now. The truth of the matter is, I was around. I was 25 when this movie came out. I don't remember that being the case, like where it was all about the trial, unless
Well, I mean, OJ,
maybe with OJ.
It was the
Jeffrey
OJ. Yeah, he talks about
Dahmer.
the OJ Dream
It
Team.
was-
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess, and that's actually, so you're right. That's so cliched that he is just, it's so pathetic. I think the bottom line is, after all the work and all the mystique, it's so pathetic that he has such a ridiculous, he just wants to be famous. It's gross.
Well, that's
you
like
know?
the idea, like going back to the idea though that sequels are inherently inferior to the original in a way, because like Randy says it right before he gets killed. Like Stu and Billy were much more original because they innovated this persona, whereas like everybody else from here on out is just copying something they created. And I think that works, that their motivation is more pedestrian or ridiculous, but also again, I don't really care, at that point, once the thing is, I will say this, one of the problems with the Scream movies, although obviously it's not an insurmountable problem because they've made 6 of them, is that once the mask comes off, Ghostface ceases to exist and
Yeah.
is inevitably not as interesting as the person. Like the person under the mask is not as interesting as the persona of Ghostface is scary, like, because like it elevates you.
Yeah.
Like the costume elevates you to like this mysterious level, but like once you're dealing with like a flesh and blood human being, it's inevitably not as frightening. That
Yeah.
being said, this is what separates these from Nightmare on Elm Street and Halloween and Friday the 13th, is that these are flesh and blood people. These aren't monsters. You know, these are people pretending to be a monster.
I think. Oh, go ahead, please. Sorry.
No. You first.
I think there's a good design here in a sense, because you're laying out there are positives and negatives to this design, but it's a design. That's what's great, is that it is a concept that the designers of this series have created for themselves, where they have to deal with that there's drawbacks and there's strengths, and that's
what's
neat.
interesting about that ultimately is, you know, this starts out as a franchise that's ribbing on horror movie cliches, but then it turns around where there are certain rules to surviving a Scream movie, and there's certain rules that a Scream movie has to follow, and you know, now they can even riff on that, you know.
And by the time we get to and we really shouldn't discuss it, but it's going to get even more twisty when we get to Scream 5, you know, and even more, because there's more to comment on over the course of 20 years, you know, because they take a big long break between 4 and 5. I don't remember how long it goes, but it's a while.
It's like almost a decade. Like,
yeah. So that's sort of remarkable. So that means that by the time you get to that one, it's 20 years since the first movie. So that's pretty impressive. So yeah. So okay. We didn't talk about Jerry O'Connell.
By the way, I do find it interesting that with the way 90s technology is, that the fact that you can buy or somehow purchase a thing that makes you automatically sound like Ghostface no matter what the timbre of your voice is.
Yeah.
I love the detail.
Is just,
I love the detail that the guy who does the voice would be on set and he actually would talk to them on the phone to freak them out a little bit, but they wouldn't see him, and like they were kind of all like scared of the dude.
And
except for apparently Sarah Michelle Gellar, who would just chat with him.
True. By the way, it is Monk and not Munch, but it sounds funnier.
It does.
I apologize.
I was in the moment, and my art.
He's been dead a while, Jason. I don't think
my art degree background. And you know, Munch face sounds funnier.
Yeah, of course it does.
Munch face does sound.
That's why I ripped. But I feel like it started to eat at me that I didn't speak up. But Edvard Munch.
No, that's fantastic. I appreciate you pointing that out. I regret the error. And I will get it right next time.
Go into SCAD, if I didn't correct you, I think I would be even more the fact that, you know, even more so there would be torches and pitchforks more than I haven't seen Scream until now. So he's Norwegian, so it's Munch.
Okay. All right. So we talked a little bit about tech. We talked about the only thing I'll say about the fashion here, other than we talked about, you know, Sydney's fashion, is, man, if you want to just know what it would be like to like jump through the pond on a way home and just wind up in 1997, this movie will show you how people were dressing, and it is wild. That's so neat. It's one of my favorite things. So yeah, I think that really takes us to our final thoughts. If there's, you know, because we even talked about music. So it was Tony, Julia, Drew, and then I'll go. So Tony, Scream 2, we are just at the beginning of a roller coaster of a whole bunch of Scream movies. So final thoughts, but we will definitely be back real quick with another one.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's gonna be my favorite. Who knows? Who knows what'll happen along the way, along this journey. It doesn't appear currently as if this will be my favorite series. But going back to it, it's got some really great kills. I absolutely see, even if I wasn't its target audience, I understand why it's a cultural force. Right.
Mhm.
And that's the big thing. I also, I came back, I was thinking about it as we were talking. I think the other backlash for me was, I didn't want to see pretty Dawson's Creek style people
Mhm.
in a horror movie. And that was the point of a lot of 90s horror movies. Like, let's get all the attractive people that and
And Joshua
Yeah.
which
Jackson
is ridiculous because it's like it's always been that way, right? Like,
Yeah.
let's not kid ourselves. But I was of the age where I'm like, I don't watch these shows. I don't want to see these people
Yeah.
in my horror movie, whatever.
You didn't watch
Ridiculous.
Buffy?
I mean, I did watch Buffy, but that
Well, that
was a
was reason
different.
enough.
That was the different take. That was still horror, right?
Yeah.
So
No,
I
I'm
don't
just
know.
saying, like Sarah Michelle Gellar being in this.
No, of course.
Yeah.
But she but there's a
Sarah
whole.
Michelle Gellar was kind of a scream queen. Like,
Yeah,
she had a little bit
yeah.
more of a cool factor.
It
I think.
fit in a way that I was like, this isn't my generation. Even though, I'm in 97, I'm still in my 20s. Like, it's not,
Yeah.
I mean, whatever, man. I mean, this is not my own stupid, but I just realized, like, oh, that was part of it, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's great kills. There's a lot of meta stuff. Sometimes it's more cheeky than I still am like, that's not, I get annoyed, but I definitely get it more. And there's a lot to discuss, which I think is really and we talked about, you said, Wes Craven being part of these movements. Like, if you're part of what brings horror back into mainstream, for better or worse, even if you're I was still only watching obscure giallo or whatever, right? Like, whatever you want to say, the fact that it did open up, and those anytime it's like a record A&R. You have really popular artists. It doesn't happen as much now, but there was a time where, like, yeah, this super popular artist pays for 80% of our roster who aren't selling that. Right? So horror coming back does open doors for a lot of people to make horror, and that trickles down to gems that aren't perhaps this popular, but hey, yeah, I'll give you money to make a horror movie. You want to make one like this? Well, not exactly, but what if we did this? So anytime that opens the door, that can be a really good thing, or provides an interest, even if you're not funded by a major studio. Oh, I've heard this horror thing can make money. Yeah, sure, we'll go with that. I'm gonna make this thing, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's great. So
awesome. Okay, we will definitely continue that conversation. Julia, same thing. I mean, we'll be back next week with number 3. I have no idea, none, what we're in for. So this thing could go right off the cliff, and we might regret what's going to happen over the next month. But anyway, here we are at Scream 2. Go ahead. Final thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've covered everything. It's a fun time for me. I enjoy it. Because I don't like slasher movies in general, although I've seen a lot of them.
Goodness
Therefore,
knows. Yes.
it makes it much more palatable to me to have all the actors because I did watch all this. I watched all those shows. Like, every actor that's in this movie, I know them well, and I knew them well. So for me, it was a lot of fun to be like, oh, hey, there's Pacey,
Yeah.
like, whatever. It's like just all the different people. So I get a kick out of it, I think, and now watching it with all the the being able to see what the 90s actually looked like being outside of it. It's really fun in that regard as well. And yeah, like we said, the ending, the twist at the end it's really a twist. That's not why you watch it. It's not, don't watch it for that. But I will say for the 6th one that we'll talk about in a few weeks, that one, the killers actually is kind of like, this is interesting, so that's more going to be more memorable to me. I actually forgot. So in Scream 6, they spoil the end of all the other movies. But I forgot. Like, just having watched it recently, I was like, I remember they spoiled who did it, but I don't remember who it was. So that's how
isn't that cool? I was so thankful for that too. I was really glad that I could not remember at all.
Yeah.
Because they listed every single killer in the other movies, and we completely forgot it. So yeah, thank you. Drew, what about you?
I'm going to preface next week Preface, Ghostface.
Mhm.
Scream 3 is the worst one. So I feel
Ah,
kind of bad. I kind of feel bad that we are
My
going.
expectations. Okay,
I
that's
kind of
fine.
feel bad that we're going from arguably the best sequel to arguably the worst. It has its fans. I think it, and I do think
listen,
it
that is certainly in keeping with horror franchises. Okay, so
yeah,
that's
and
that's all right.
and it does have one really amazing sequence that I feel like justifies the whole movie, and I will let you guess what that is when you're watching it and get back to me. Um, so I will be interesting to watch the reactions to Scream 3. I hope it does not kill your enthusiasm for going forward because I do think it's a drop down in quality from this one. That being said, I had a really good time talking about this one tonight, and I'm looking forward to talking about Scream 3 because I do think there is still a lot to talk about. And I'm looking forward to this whole series because we've never done a deep dive on a whole franchise like
Mm.
this. And I think that this is an interesting experiment. And maybe if people really like this, like, we sort of piecemealed our way through Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th. We still haven't done all of them.
Right.
But if like people like this, they can go on our social media and say, hey, do more where you systematically go through the whole series. Because that's I think the only other one that we've done the entire series may be The Exorcist. Correct me if I'm wrong. But
No, I think you're right about that. And we did also the Hammer Frankenstein, and I'm not even sure that we got all of those.
I don't
That,
think we did Frankenstein Created Woman. So
and I'm not sure we did Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell. So
yeah.
you're right. So we
So
really
this
just did like a top 3 or something of that. So
So
yeah.
if people like this, like they like us doing this, because I think this is going to be fun. Like especially being able to go through like the discussion of like what is 90s, like the next movie we're going to be in the early aughts, like
Mhm.
going through all these different decades and talking about all the aesthetics. If nothing else, I think that's going to be fun. So
Yeah.
great time talking about one of my favorite movies tonight, and I think I'm going to have a ball going through the rest of these movies with y'all. So I'm looking forward to the incoming weeks.
That is so super exciting. Uh, oh gosh, that leads me. I have nothing to add to that other than that you'll get more of my just loopy thoughts next week. So what about our endorsements? Like what you would have, obviously we want people to come back next week for the next Scream edition, but what have you been watching or listening to other than Scream films that you want people to know about? Starting with Tony. Tony, what do you got?
I have one, but by the way, I have one question that I want to give to viewers, or to I would love to hear even tangential stories because Julia reminded me of something.
Mm,
Julia, you said you're not a slasher fan, but this movie kind of brought you at least like you're like, oh, I like these movies.
Yeah.
I would What would be fascinating to me
mhm.
is to hear more about people. The opposite of what I probably thought of when these came out is I would love to hear about people who were like, look, I did not like horror, and I watched Scream and then went, oh, I gotta see, more Nightmare. I would even what I've loved even more is like, oh well, that got me into like obscure Euro trash or what, something that like where you just went, I didn't think I liked this, and now I saw Scream, and that's what turned me on. I would love to hear more of those stories, just because I don't know how often that happened, but I
Mm,
always think that's cool. And not that you have to, like, you don't have to, you can watch the Marvel movies and not have to read Marvel comics. I
that's
think
for
it's
sure.
cool when people go, whoa, I like that a lot. I really kind of want to read some of this, and that's awesome. Like, life's too short to worry about that kind of crap. And I'm definitely, like what you like. I love when people take deep dives into things and become fans of things legitimately. But you don't have to. But I would be really curious to hear about that. As far as endorsements go, this is another movie that, I watch a lot of genre film. I watched a lot of VHS stuff. But Amazon, it was another one that was like, hey, check this out. A movie called Terminus from 1987 about a futuristic convoy style, like competition with computerized trucks. And it's got this bizarre, like, the AI in it or the computer in it has this mouth that's a latex kind of monster mouth that's pulled. It's when it moves, it's hooked to these machinery. It's got Karen Allen,
Huh.
Jürgen Prochnow. It's got all these people. We're just like, what? Just bizarre. It's such a weird. I thought I'd seen most of this stuff, but this one was an out of the blue. I'm not saying it's a great movie, but what I am saying is I've seen a lot of movies, and I had no idea that the futuristic truck convoy AI computer movie was a thing till I saw Terminus from 1987. So if you're into, let's check out some bizarre 80s, kind of a little bit on the fringe, definitely taking advantage of Mad Max and other things, which probably led also to like the Highwayman TV series. This is kind of that in between Mad Max and Highwayman.
Love it.
Which is obscure. That's a weird, very brief reference right there.
I think I may be the only well, you and me are the only people who watched Highwayman, honestly.
I mean, there was a certain audience, and guess what? You can't keep a series going with just like the people who remember Highwayman. There's not enough. But it did have a truck that had a helicopter in it, and it had Jacko, the battery man. Which all of this sounds like you're making. If you're young enough, you're making all this up.
Yeah,
like this is not true. Like a guy with knock this battery off my shoulder. What? Why would you have a commercial
very
like that?
briefly, so that we don't get too far off course? The Highwayman was a futuristic spy show about a spy agency that operated entirely out of trucks that moved back and forth across the.
Yeah, but it's post-apocalyptic. Like it was definitely like, this Mad Max thing is good, but
Terminus it was post-apocalyptic, but only kind of because they still had towns and
right.
Yeah,
anyway. Banking off the star who was in an Energizer commercial. This is So, but anyway, Terminus. If that sounds like your bag. Again, I can't say it's the greatest movie, but when I find something that I go, I have never seen this. And there is another movie called Terminus. So you were looking, the one I'm referencing comes from 1987. So that's my, obscure movie endorsement.
And embedded in there was yet another endorsement. That's the hilarious part. Julia, top that.
I'm just gonna grab random words from Tony's endorsement. I'm gonna go. I legit am. No, I legit am. Marvel and Deep Dive. So Marvel,
nice.
Marvel. The newest Guardians of the Galaxy movie is awesome, very depressing and sad, but awesome. And the Deep Dive is actually a YouTube channel spin-off of New Rockstars, which is hosted by Eric Voss, and he goes deep into a bunch of different Marvel movies. Because you reminded me when you're talking about like, oh, you don't have to read the comics, but it's cool if you do. That's what they do on these Deep Dives and on just on New Rockstars, is they'll take these movies and then they'll go, that comes from this comic, and that comes from this comic, and this is different. Now this is different from the comics. It's really cool and fun. So, I'm just
borrowing really cool. Okay, so borrowing your words is what you're calling for.
The Deep Dive and Guardians of the Galaxy 3. I loved it.
Yeah, for sure. Monsieur Drew, what about you?
By the time you're hearing this, you only have 3 days to go nominate for the Ringo Awards. Please, for your consideration, nominate me for Best Writer, nominate Halloweenman for Best Webcomic, nominate Halloweenman again for Best Hero, and nominate Global Comics for Best Publisher. You can do that at ringooawards.com. And that is my one and only endorsement this week. Please, if you, for the love of the sound of my voice, if you've ever gotten even an inkling of enjoyment out of what I do on the show, please do this for me. It's really important to me this year.
All right. Thank you very much. And I will make sure and do that ASAP. For my part, my only endorsement, actually, my endorsement is a piece of advice that I've seen shared and that I actually want to share, which is, so I was talking to a screenwriter, and he and I were talking about a project, and I said, hey, I'm listening to this podcast not to be named right now. I said, you got to check this out. and he goes, "Oh, I know that podcaster. They trashed one of my projects once, so I don't like to listen to them." And I just want to say, do not trash other people's writing online, on Twitter, even at a bar where there might be other people listening. Don't do it. The reason why is that'll happen. The world of writers is extremely small. And so if you don't want to be, Julia and I always talk about the fact that if you meet somebody and they are both your cousin's roommate and a fan of Meatloaf, that human being to you is 50% cousin's roommate and 50% fan of Meatloaf. If somebody hears about you and you are 100% they trashed my work online, you're toast. So that's my endorsement is do not trash another writer's work, because you never ever know when you might actually need to reference them, call them up, wind up working for them, whatever. I think everybody on this call can probably identify with that. It's a small ass world, man. So keep it amongst your close friends. Don't tweet against somebody. So yeah, that's my only endorsement. Also because Julia got Guardians of the Galaxy. And that's it. This was such an exciting conversation, and I can't wait to be back next week. So everybody have a wonderful, wonderful week. Thank you so much for this.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.